Hello and welcome to Relationship Helpers. This is your host, Vincent and his
wife, Laura. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for just tuning us in here so that hopefully you can get some more information to help your relationships, to help your marriage, to help your relationship with your kids and with your other family members. We appreciate every one of you, and hopefully you were able to listen last week about introverts, and hopefully that was very helpful, that you were able to learn more about those who may be quiet, that there's really a lot going on with the quiet ones.
But as you learned from last week, introverts have a lot to contribute to relationships as well. And so I hope that you do get to check that out, because there are a lot of strengths that come from introversion, especially if you know how to use your introversion in a healthy way.
Right. So check that out in case you missed it. But we just appreciate you listening here every week, and make sure that you go to our show notes page. There's lots of information there. There's links, and of course, share our show with others. Share it with those you feel like it would benefit, on social media. And
that's what Relationship Helpers is about. We're about trying to connect you with information and resources that will help you and your relationships.
Right. We are trying to help not only our clients, but everyone, other people who are struggling. I mean, if you're struggling with your relationship in your marriage, if you're struggling with your relationship with your children,
it could be coworkers, yes.
Right. Mm-hmm. But our goal is to help those who need help in their relationships. And as I tell my clients, don't just, yes, you may be coming to me for counseling, but don't make that just your one source of knowledge, of inspiration, of change, but use all the sources possible. I encourage a lot of my clients to go to group as well. And when I mean group, it doesn't have to be a counseling group, but it may be a Bible study, or it may be getting connected some way. It may be going to the Y, doing a swim class. It may be
other forms of fellowship even.
Right. And then I encourage them to read, and then I encourage them to listen to podcasts, not just our podcast, but other people's podcasts.
So don't be so limited in your search for information.
Right. So hopefully this can just add to your resource bank of information in your journey to health and thriving. This week, we are going to be talking about the balance between home life and work life. What does that look like? What
is there balance?
Well, yeah, is there balance, and what does that entail?
That's our question to you.
Yeah,
that's your question.
Yeah, this is everybody has to, of course, work in order to support their life, or at least they need money, unless you're like really wealthy. But even if you're really wealthy, then you've got to manage your money to a certain extent, so you have to work on that part. Everybody, to a certain extent, has to work, and many of us have to work substantially to afford our lifestyle, to support our families. That has always been kind of, I guess, a challenge, figuring out what is appropriate, what works best.
And I think many people struggle with hitting that sweet spot.
Yeah, I think they really do. And some of it is, I think about our culture. We're in the United States, and I'll say maybe norm, and I put quotation marks if you can see my hands. Maybe
air quotes.
Yeah, the air quotes. The norm for Western society, for the United States, is, I would say, really not very healthy.
It's a keeping up with the Joneses mentality a lot of times.
Right. So there's a big focus on materialism and gaining more money, and maybe not so much about focusing on family or relationships at times. There seems to be this huge emphasis on gaining or acquiring things.
That's right. I mean, you can kind of look at the products that we purchase and look over the past few decades. Look at what TVs have done. They've gone from the big, tube TV to the flat screen. And, now it's like an expectation that if you have a TV in your home, it's a flat screen TV. And how did that happen? It's because we bought into it.
Right. So we've bought into all of these marketing strategies of these companies that are trying to get you to buy their product so they can make money. And we listen to what they tell us over the TV, radio, the internet, that we need this, we've got to have this. If we get this, then it will make us happy or help us or something like that.
And what we're finding is it's not making people happy. They're having to work that much harder to be able to achieve that lifestyle.
Right, and many times it's unrealistic. So let's get on. So I've got some bullet points here that I want to talk to about the balance between home and work life. One of them is, the first one is energy and time spent at each one is cumulative. Okay, so my point here is that usually the more time you spend at work, the more energy that you spend at work, the more that you invest at work, then usually you will reap more money, more benefits from that. And vice versa. The more time, the more energy, the more effort that you put forth with family time, with your family life, the more that you will reap and benefit as far as the relationships with your family. And that builds, usually, up to a certain point.
That's right. We're going to go into also today what's an unhealthy point.
Right. So this first one is what I would call, kind of you reap what you sow. If you're investing into this area, you will get roughly the amount equivalent, or the consequences, the results of it will be how much you've actually put into it, how much effort, how much time. And there has to be a balance with that.
Okay, so let's look at what happens if you spend too much time with your family.
Right, yeah, so there's another balance. If you spend too much time with your family, then let's go with if you spend too much time, let's say, with the kids. Let's say you're always with the kids. Let's say we'll just say they're stay-at-home. You have a stay-at-home mom, and they teach the kids, or what do you call it, homeschool. And then they take them everywhere. They go to church with them. They are never away from the kids. They're continually with the kids. Or it could be the husband that's continually with the kids. Then too much of that, where you're continually with the kids, continually making decisions for the kid, we call it
helicopter parenting. Well, it is... I think that you need to put a few caveats in what you just said.
Right.
Stay-at-home mothers, they have no other recourse to be at home and to be with the kids. So when we mean spend too much time with the kids, we don't mean taking care of the kids. We mean when there comes a point where the child has no sense of independence, like independent play, opportunities to have their own time to themselves, to kind of explore things on their own. I think that's what I'm understanding from
right,
the
that's what I'm trying to explain.
I just want to let y'all know I've got single or the stay-at-home mothers' backs here. Or stay-at-home parents' backs.
Right,
here.
yeah, it's not putting down stay-at-home parents, but it would be someone who was continually, if they were, that would be someone that would have the time or...
it's more likely to happen in that situation. Yeah. I understand, but I just wanted to throw those caveats in there.
Yeah, but it would be them being with them all the time, continually with them all the time, like in every situation.
With no freedom of choice on the part of the child.
Right. Without the child, let's say, now some homeschools, what they'll do is part of the time they will be taught, say at a church or cooperative, a co-op, and so the parent's not there teaching, other people are teaching, they've got time away, or they may, the kids may be at church and someone else's.
But this goes a little further than that, though. I'm thinking from like from a discipline standpoint. If we were to take a look at what we talked about just a few minutes ago, helicopter parenting, there are situations where a parent enables the child so much, tries to keep the child from making mistakes or failing or what have you, that the parent becomes so involved, or We'll throw another one out there. You've got a parent whose child actually goes to public school, and the parent acts on behalf of that child all the time, going to the teacher. It's not the child's fault that the child's making an F. It's the teacher's fault. We're seeing a lot of that these days with the helicopter parenting.
So you can spend too much time with your family in the area of kids, and that can become helicopter parenting, and the result is the kids never have time away from the parent, and they don't learn to make decisions on their own.
Right.
So they're not as confident.
Right. And so the ability for that child to have independent thought and the freedom to make some mistakes.
Right. And we've got some articles on that. So make sure you go to either relationshiphelpers.net or go to ccofmooresville.com, and we have some more articles where we actually get more in depth about helicopter parenting.
That's right. We've got an article called 11 Ways
Right.
a Parent Sabotages the Child's Future and How to Stop, and I'd recommend that one for that topic.
Right. So now you can spend too much time, let's say, with your spouse. And when that happens, we call that just smothering.
Clinginess, neediness sometimes, too.
Right.
Yeah.
And that can be just as unhealthy.
And that can be codependency as well, which is another topic that we can discuss in another episode.
Right. But so that is two different ways that you can spend too much time with your family. So you can spend too much time with your family. So that's not the solution, spending all the time with your family.
One other thing, we've not discussed spending too much time with extended family. There may be an expectation that a grown adult spouse spends so much time with his parents or something of that nature, and then that impedes the relationship he has with his wife.
Yes,
or vice versa.
Most definitely. So the extended family as well,
So
there can become problems.
Yeah.
So there's too much with...
Yeah, no leave and cleave there.
Right,
Okay.
right, yeah. So that similar to the helicopter parenting, that's kind of your parents or the in-laws kind of, again, making decisions for these grown children, where the grown children aren't making decisions on their own.
Mm-hmm. And that's a form of enabling as well.
It is. Next one, so another principle, the third one I wanted to talk about the balance between home life and work life is some husbands, and I say husbands, sometimes it can be the wife, but many times it's the husband. Some husbands feel like they are in the predicament of, I have to work a lot to make the amount of money that makes my wife happy, but my wife is mad that I am not home enough.
So she wants it all, huh?
Right. So, they feel like they can't win, that they're stuck in this, I've got to work a lot, but then my wife wants me home a lot. I've got to make this amount of money, but she wants me at home as well.
Yeah, we see this particularly in men, but this can happen as well with women.
For some, this undue pressure to make enough money to be the man, to make enough money to
be the breadwinner.
Yeah, be the breadwinner. Sometimes, for some husbands, it's really all in their head. And what I mean is, they're kind of mind reading their wife. They may think that the wife wants them to make this certain amount of money, and that may be in their head because they've heard the wife, and so what they're doing is they're assuming that their wife demands so much money for such and such house because they've heard them make comments maybe to, I don't know, when they're looking at something on like a magazine or something, or when they've talked to their friends or something like that, but they've not actually had the specific conversation.
It's not been direct.
Wife. Right, it's not been direct. They've just heard this.
They're making assumptions.
And they're assuming their wife expects them to make this certain amount of money, assuming that they have to live in this certain house or this certain neighborhood or to go to this certain vacation spot, etc. So for some, it's really all in their head. Now, for others, it's not in their head. The wife has
very clear demands.
Has told them, hey, this is what I expect. This is the house we got to live in. This is the amount of square footage. This is the car that I expect for us to drive. This is where the kids need to be going to school, the private school. This is the vacation that we need to go on. These are the clothes that I expect for us to be able to afford, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. For some, it is very clear. When this happens, so first of all, for the first one, where it's really in their head, where they're assuming he needs to have the conversation with the wife.
So he needs to learn how to communicate clearly.
Yes.
And they need to learn how to communicate clearly to one another.
Yes, and talk about this. Talk about this predicament. Talk about this struggle that he's having with balancing the amount of time that he works and being home enough as well. So that's the first one. Now the second one, this goes back to he needs to work on what I would call, or what's called the law of responsibility. In the book Boundaries, which was written by Dr. Townsend and Dr. Cloud, and they've had a whole series, they describe the law of responsibility. And let me explain what that is. That is, we are responsible to each other, but not for each other. So what that means is, he is responsible for his actions, the husband. When he goes to work, when he comes home, he's responsible for the time he comes in the door or when he plans his schedule. But he is not responsible for his wife's emotions or his wife's expectations or his wife's wants. Does that make sense?
It does. It reminds me of our work with codependency. With codependency, it's when someone feels responsible for another person's feelings.
Right. So he is continually trying to make her happy when he cannot make her happy.
She's got to learn that on her own.
Yes. She is the only person that can control her feelings. He cannot control her feelings. In an instance like that, the husband needs to, this is really a spiritual matter here, that the husband needs to work on himself, and this really pertains to him having, taking spiritual leadership in the relationship and saying, hey, I value our family, and I feel like I'm not spending enough time with the kids, enough time with you. I'm going to spend less time at work, and we're going to have to rearrange our budget. And that's what I'm going to start doing. And I know this may upset you, but that's something you're going to have to work on as well, because this is what's going to be healthy. I know this is going to be healthy for our family. Now that is another conversation to be had, which can be a very difficult conversation, but it would make the family and the relationships much healthier. The next principle on this is, and I think a lot of people have this, or the questions they have, I have my couples ask these questions, is what is the appropriate work week? What's the appropriate amount of work? Here's a few statistics or some things that I've learned about. So the work week in the United States, that the work week has been fought over since the 1860s at least. And when I mean fought over, this was in Congress. Actually, President Grant had introduced a bill to limit the work week to 40 hours way back in the 1860s. It didn't go through, but it had been fought over in Congress and government for years. In 1890, they did a study, and the average work week for a manufacturing worker, this is someone in a mill, was about 100 hours a week.
That's incredible.
Oh my goodness. Yes. Okay. It was to that point, so it was just kind of ridiculous. In 1914, Henry Ford, he came out with the
assembly line.
Yeah, the assembly line with cars. Henry Ford was all about making things efficient, right? That's what he was about. That's what he was focused on. Henry Ford, he studied this, or he had his executives to study this, to find out what was the appropriate amount of work to produce the most cars, quality cars, coming off their assembly line. And he found out from all their studies, from all of their tinkering with their assembly line, that less than 40 hours per week, that was
like the sweet spot.
It was the optimal. Mm-hmm. And they got the most production out of their workers when they worked 40 hours or less. So he started implementing that in 1914.
So it's really interesting to hear about the kind of evolution of work and the amount of time worked kind of through the Industrial Revolution, and see where we've come in that regard.
Right. There's a lot of statistics, a lot of learning that went through this. However, it really wasn't until about 1940, and that's when Congress passed an act, that 8-hour day and 40-hour work week really became standard for most industries.
That's really interesting, hearing that statistic, because I'm thinking about where we were, our country's status in 1940. There were a lot of men off to war in World War II, and a lot of women in the workforce. These were the Rosie the Riveters. They were having to balance working outside of the home with taking care of the kids without a husband at home.
Right, yeah. Yeah,
so it's not ironic, I find, that this happened in 1940.
Well, maybe so. Maybe that's what really kind of... However, I mean, looking back at that, there was about 80-some years of this debate in our Congress. So my point is, the 40-hour work week, it was not an overnight decision. This was something that was studied, that was bounced back and forth.
It evolved.
It evolved over time in the United States. So, all right, that's what we know about United States government-wise as far as hours per week, what was kind of found out through industries. Now, in the Bible, of course, Genesis talks about God works for 6 days, and on the seventh day, of course, he rests. And we call that the Sabbath. And then even in the Ten Commandments, you'll look at Exodus chapter 20, verse 8, it says, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work." You've got from the Bible no more than 6 days. We've got that there. Now you were going to say something?
Oh, it's just God was setting the standard.
Right, yeah. So God he was kind of showing us, we needed a time of rest.
Yeah, it wasn't necessarily that he was doing that just for him, but just to show us, to model that behavior to us. Hey, I rested. You do that. Right.
Well, and he's the maker. He knows how we're put together, the limits of our body.
He's the first production manager here.
Right, yes, exactly. So he knows us. So from all that, I would say, and this is just putting out those two things, that that a person really should do no more than, say, 48 hours of work in a week. No more than that is healthy. And then it would be preferable to be somewhere around 40 hours or less. And here's the fact. So there's been lots of studies on this since then as well. The fact is we need rest to be fully functional at work. I mean, some people may be at work, but they're not fully functional. They may be working all these hours, but the quality that's coming out.
Hence the national obsession with coffee.
Right. Yeah. And studies have shown that the human body can do short bursts of extra work. And they really said for 3 weeks or so you could do this extra work. However, after about 3 weeks or so of doing this extra, that the quality really decreases after that. And after too much time of this overtime work, a person needs even extra rest time.
So you have to compensate.
Right. Yeah, people have to compensate for it. So that's another consideration there. So that's a food for thought on what is optimal, the number of hours of work. And of course, it depends on each business, but I would say somewhere around the 40 to 48 hours per week. Now, the next point, and I have, so I meet with couples a lot, do marriage counseling, and I do have many couples that own their own business, and they really struggle with that balance.
We know something about that, don't we?
Right, that's what we do, of course. Yes, and this is something we've had to work on ourselves, figuring out that balance. When does it cut off the work, the talking about business? So here are some guidelines that of course, Laura and myself have came up for ourselves, but that I work with and that is my young son.
If you hear
as well,
if you hear a baby crying, you know that we're balancing work and home right as we speak. This is literal, man.
Right. So here are some guidelines that we use to balance the home life and the work life. So number 1, setting a time that you do not answer the phone or emails after.
So we're having to be really intentional with this. We have to say to one another, okay, when can we cut this off so that we can spend time together?
Right. So it may be setting a certain time. It may be 6 p.m. After 6 p.m. in the evenings, you don't answer the phone or you don't respond to emails or reply to emails after that. Or it may be 7 p.m. or whatever that you come up with, or it may be 5 p.m. It really depends on your business. So the first one is setting a time in the evenings, in the day, that you don't answer the phone, you don't deal with business calls after, and you don't reply to emails. Number 2, the second one that recommend is setting a time that you will stop talking about business. So the first one was responding to people about business. We're talking about calls, we're talking about emails. But the second one is actually setting a time that you will stop talking about business. So that means that the husband and wife will not talk about their business out after this certain amount of time in the evenings. So that may be, let's say, 7 p.m. So a couple may say, after 7 p.m. in the evening, we're not going to talk about business. We're not going to bring up business. We're not going to talk about customers. We're not going to talk about strategies for sales. We're not going to talk about problems we've had here or production after this time. But we will instead talk about just things that are relaxing, or we will talk about our family. We'll play with the kids after that. The third suggestion or guideline that we have is scheduling a block of time that you will discuss business or finances as a couple. So this would be setting aside a certain time to you plan business goals, adjust the family budget, and to plan how to spend money. When you have this certain block of time, so it may be like an hour. So I would say, for example, maybe you set on Tuesdays between 7 p.m. and 8 p.m. that you specifically talk about these business finances, family finances during this time.
So once again, being very intentional about your time and your plans and being direct in conversation about how you schedule this time together.
Right, and both of you know about
no assumptions.
That. Right, and both of you plan for that time. So you've already got information, you got notes that you want to talk about or that you want to bring up with the other person.
So this should be as clear as a doctor's appointment scheduled. It's like, okay, you're going to the doctor at 5 o'clock on Thursday afternoon. Same applies to your meeting with your spouse.
Right.
For this conversation.
Yeah, and for the most part, it's not discussed at other times, business time. I mean, it can be, of course, during the business day, you'll talk about business things, but especially in the evenings after that set time to stop business talk, this business or finances is not discussed.
So you really have to build boundaries around these discussions so that they have a time and a place.
Right.
So you're not getting into bed at night and you're like, oh, we didn't talk about X, Y, and Z. So you're not bringing it into other areas of your marriage.
Right. And if you've noticed that it's gotten a little bit quieter as we've talked on this one, the reason is Jesse has become part of the discussion here. Why Laura had to go and actually pick him up and hold him, and that seems to really calm him.
He really likes grabbing from the microphone.
He does. he gets quiet after that too. He's part of the conversation. Okay, so
he's our first listener.
He is. Right, yeah.
He's the first one to know what this podcast is all about.
Right, and he's really paying attention. So number 4. So this would be the fourth guideline to balancing your home and work life. These are for specifically couples who have businesses. Now, I also have couples, let's say they don't have a business together, but maybe both of them work from home. They work at separate places, but they have home offices there. These will apply to those as well.
I find in my counseling practice that those that work from home seem to struggle more than those that work outside of home sometimes.
Right, yes. Because
they have more difficulty establishing the boundaries. It's blurrier.
Right, yes. And I'll say, this isn't part of the list that I've kind of made up, but one thing that I know some couples do, I've had in my practice, that they will literally get dressed and they will go out or go into their office in their house, and when they're there, they're like at work.
Yeah.
So in their mindset, they're there. When the doors close, they're there. And then they don't leave until they're done with work. It's not like they go back and forth.
Yeah, they switch gears.
Right. So they actually go through that door, and it's kind of like a whole change when they go through that threshold.
Well, that sounds all nice and good, and but then when you have children that you have to take care of, then you don't have that 8 hours in the office type experience.
Right. So that makes it really difficult to keep that mindset, I guess, or kind of make that boundary. So number 4, this is, and it's kind of what we talked about before already, is setting aside a day during the week where you recharge and do not work on business, you do not discuss business, or think about business on that day.
That's a real challenge for couples.
It is, and hopefully this would be, for Christians, it would be your Sabbath. Whether it's a Sunday or a Saturday, this is your time that you're worshiping God, that you're not focusing on business, that you're focusing on family, and you're focusing on your relationships. But yes, this can be difficult for many couples where they've not set aside this time, where their business seems to encroach, I guess, on the weekend, more so maybe than they would like.
They like to play catch up a lot of times.
Right, things that they don't get done during the week.
Mm-hmm. So what ends up happening is that all that energy they use on catching up, not the condiment. Right. All that energy they use on catching up, they end up putting themselves into a deficit for the energy that they can use with their family. Right,
and they're not able to get refueled, so they don't really have as much energy when they start back on Monday, and then it just keeps going. So that's number 4. Number 5 is proactively planning on your calendar mini vacations and vacations. So this is, a couple coming together and looking at their calendar and looking, months down the road and saying, hey, this weekend we're going to go off somewhere, or this weekend we're going to have a staycation. Maybe it doesn't.
Yeah, it doesn't require money.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't mean that you have to go anywhere. I mean, you could go
because you don't have to work harder to have to make that money for that vacation.
Right. I mean, you could just go to a local state park where you can drive and come back. Something that doesn't really cost you any money. But this is where you block off that time, that 2 or 3 days where you're not going to work, where you're going to focus on relaxing, where you're going to focus on family time, focus on recharging yourself. And my suggestion would be, if possible, really what you really need to do is at least one of these mini vacations each quarter, because that would be an important time. That would be, and spreading it out so that you don't let too much time go by. You don't want months and months and months and months. You don't want 6-9 months and you've not had this break. But you need to have it more frequent. And then, of course, in the summer or in the winter, you may have a full week or 2 weeks to have a good long break as well. But I encourage couples to get on their calendar and go ahead and mark those times off, because if they don't, and I find this with many small businesses, if they do not do that, then something else will get planned in its place, and then it just doesn't happen.
You have to prioritize it.
You have to put it at the forefront. We've talked a lot about this balance between work and home, and we've hit some of these areas here, and I hope this was valuable information for you. Make sure that you go to relationshiphelpers.net with our show notes, or you can go to ccofmooresville.com as well. And if you like this, if you got comments, things you would like to add to it, please do that on those pages and let us know. Let us know what you think. Let us know what you would like for us to talk about. If there's some areas that you would like us to talk in more detail about, we would be glad to do that.
I'd like to end today's episode with a quote from Max Lucado that I think really applies to what we're talking about today. This is what he said. When you are in the final days of your life, what will you want? Will you hug that college degree in the walnut frame? Will you ask to be carried to the garage so you can sit in your car? Will you find comfort in rereading your financial statement? Of course not. What will matter then will be people. If relationships will matter most then, shouldn't they matter most now?
Well, as you could tell, Jesse really liked that quote. He had to kind of add a little backdrop to that. So, yes, that's something really to consider. How are your relationships? Are you prioritizing your relationships? Thank you for listening to Relationship Helpers. We appreciate you taking the time this day, and make sure you go to our website again, relationshiphelpers.net. Thank you again.
Thanks. We'll be looking forward to your next suggestion on what we should talk about.
Right. That sounds great.
Give us some comments, some feedback.
Right. And until next time, goodbye.
Note that accuracy and authority in regards to the subject matter covered today is not a replacement for professional care. Neither the host, the clinicians, or the guests are rendering clinical or other professional advice. Seek professional help if you need it.